King Jesus will be mine. See what the end will be.
God made my vow to the Lord, and I never will turn back. I will go, I shall go, to see what the end will be.
Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down.
I will go, I shall go,
but still my soul feels heavenly bound.
see what the end will be. God made my vow to the Lord, and I never will turn back. I will go, I shall go, to see what the end will be. Dawn opened my mouth to the Lord, and I never will turn back. Oh, I will go, I shall go to see what the end will be.
Good evening. Welcome. We're glad you're here. I'm going to introduce Dr. Brame, and she's going to tell you a little more about the center, and I will introduce our speakers in a few. Dr. Brame.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending the student panel event tonight to celebrate Black History Month and our Black History Month speaker series. We are so incredibly glad that you're all here. Let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Maria Brame. I am adjunct faculty and librarian here at the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University. Been here a long time, love it, always having fun and continue to have fun, especially with this group. And I get to work in a variety of ways with our Center for Global Partnerships and Learning, which is hosting and putting on this event tonight. The center provides GSEP students with a myriad of services ranging from publication support, certificate programs, access to GSEP's academic journal, and numerous other services. It's through the center that we bring you tonight's programming, which is the first in a series of student panel events scheduled to celebrate Black History Month. Please join us each week for our keynote speakers and student panels as we celebrate the hidden figures of Black History Month.
Thank you, Dr. Brame. I am Charlotta Green. I am the one that started calling, inviting, sending emails to all the students to invite you to be part of these panels. And so I thank you for saying yes. We're excited to highlight our students and to allow them to share their voices and their insight from their particular context and understanding about Black History Month. And so tonight we welcome Dr. Charles Gross, Garett-Ragland, and Michael Fountain. They will be our panel tonight. Dr. Gross is our moderator for this speaker series tonight, and he is a graduate of Pepperdine University's School of Education and Psychology. He holds a PhD in Global Leadership and Change and is currently an adjunct professor and is part of the events and liaison at Pepperdine University. Garett-Ragland is one of our students, and her mission is to build strategies that empower people, harness the power of their talents, advance them in their careers, and drive high levels of engagement and retention. Tina is a PhD candidate in Global Leadership and Change program here at Pepperdine and has a background in human resources, DEI, and leadership. And finally, Michael Fountain is a highly driven individual with a solid understanding of scope analysis with the ability to develop, manage, and execute for all phases of any given situation. Michael is a candidate for the PhD in Global Leadership and Change in our program, and we look forward to hearing their voices. Congratulations on being candidates for the PhD. We know that you've worked hard to get to this point, and so we bid you well in the rest of your journey, and we look forward to hearing your voices tonight. And so please welcome our guest tonight and our moderator. as we celebrate Black History Month. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Charlotta. And before we get started, I want to thank the Center for Global Partnerships and Learning for inviting me to be a part of this student panel. I remember when I was a student just a few short years ago, we didn't have events like this, so I'm so looking forward to see what takes place this year with the speakers panel series. Michael, Tina, I look forward to having a lively discussion with both of you this evening. Michael, since you were introduced last in Charlotta's introduction, I would like to start with you with the first question. So the first question I would like to ask you is, why is Black History Month important to you?
Thank you so much, Dr. Gross, for the question. So Black history is important to me because it designates a time when a light shines on the creative might and innovations of Black culture that has contributed to the betterment of this world, right? I think we can reflect and appreciate the perseverance of an entire people who had to pretty much pull themselves up from their bootstraps and create life within the trenches of society's hierarchy and power, established by the cruel reality of slavery and of racial discrimination and of cultural intolerance.
Thank you. Tina, is there anything you would like to add to Michael's answer or elaborate from your own perspective about what makes Black History Month important to you?
Sure, and thank you, Dr. Gross. I would say, I can't say it any better than he said it, but what I will add is Black history is, it's me, it's my history. And that's why it's really important that we continue to shine a light on and speak to our truth, because it's who we are.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure if I'm allowed to interject here, but for me, history is so important because it's not just a story from the past. We're still writing history today. I'm so proud of what you two are both doing, completing this PhD program. As I said, a couple of years ago, I was in your shoes, and I can feel a lot better moving forward knowing that I have folks like you coming behind me. So thank you for your answers to that first question. We oftentimes when it comes to history, we oftentimes refer to the same people over and over again. So I want to hear from you. Who are some of the hidden figures that have spoken to you over the years that have allowed you to learn about the contributions of African Americans and Black people in general, just in any aspect or any area of human interactions, education, law, whatever it may be, just who's spoken to you that we don't hear about in history books and on TV?
Yeah, I guess I'm happy to start with that. You know, when I think about that question, Dr. Gross, I think about the grandparents, right? I think about my grandmother who was, had 14 children growing up in the South, the daughter of, she was biracial, but didn't live that truth for years in her life. But I think about the resilience and coming behind people like a Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman's and, those individuals. But you saw the resilience, and you see the resilience and the ability to make things happen. They were just a strong people. And so I think about my lessons that came from the Black grandmothers of this world, the Black aunts who came up behind them. So I don't know that I needed to go in the history books to see it. I got to live it live, and that truth lives on inside of like my mother and her sisters and, all the women and teachers that I had the connection with. So I think our heroes were those that we had the opportunity to grow up with, but, tied to the resilience and the historical figures that we do hear about.
Excellent, excellent. Michael, would you like to add anything?
I actually love that, Tina, and that's kind of what I would have to agree with. I think about my great-grandfather, who was the father of 18 children. And I remember when he inspired me to go to the military. He went to the military during a time where Black Americans weren't even welcome in the military, where they would sign them up as cooks in the military. And yet when it comes to the battlefield, they'll make them go out and fight. And most of them weren't even trained to do so, to the point where after they left the military, a lot of them didn't even get their credentials or even able to get veteran benefits because they weren't acknowledged. And so I have to thank my grandfather, who, even though he suffered and bled through all of this, he still was resilient and coming forward to still speak life in a dead situation, and still inspired us as his grandkids and children to want more out of life. And even though there was so much hate in the world, to love, because at the end of the day, it's love that carries us over.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Michael. So Michael talks about his grandfather, and Tina mentioned those grandmothers. And I just want to point out one quick thing for the audience, those of you that joined us this evening. I don't know if you noticed that opening song was actually sung by the choir at Fisk University, which is a HBCU. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with that particular school, but I know a lot of us from the African American community have grandparents and great grandparents that might have went to HBCUs. And as Tina and Michael was speaking about grandparents, I couldn't help but think about my own grandmother, who so many years ago was at HBCU down in Alabama. And these generations later, her grandson was able to get a PhD from Pepperdine University. And so I grew up hearing those stories, just like Michael and Tina just shared with you. It's those figures that we aren't going to read about in a textbook that actually instill and plant seeds in people that help us keep moving forward. So like I said, as I said, you guys mentioning grandparents, I just had to mention my grandmother, who was very influential for me.
I love that.
But even thinking, Dr. Gross, of those African Americans who started those HBCUs back then, when education wasn't even allowed for them to even get, and how they strapped up the little pennies that they did have, because they had a dream bigger than themselves, that one day we will have the ability to come and enroll in these universities to further our education. So being proud to be an African American male that stand on the shoulders of people like those.
I concur 100%, standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. And one day someone will be sitting on our shoulders doing the same thing. Looking back, isn't necessarily a prepared question. This isn't a question that you may have prepared for, but I want to ask you, when did you first get that drive or that push, that motivation to go and pursue your PhD?
Michael, you want to go?
Oh, yes, I could go. For me, I am a first generation when it comes to education. My mother was a high school dropout, and so was my father. And so when I think about my mother and father, who later went back and got their GEDs, I think about how I inspired them, because I got my undergrad even before my mom and father even pursued their GEDs to finish school. And so to watch them be inspired by me as their son, in the hope and in the light, the opportunities that I was given. And so as a young boy, I remember, before I even knew what a PhD was, I remember saying to myself, I want a PhD. And I didn't even really know what a PhD was, but I knew it was the highest level of academia that I could go. So I was like, I want to reach to the highest level of academia, because there were people who were in my community who said that that's not possible. Or you coming from Woodville, Mississippi, with a total population of about 3,000 people, who no one ever has been to school to get PhDs back when I was going, or no one came to inspire us to say, hey, you can go further. And so I did a lot of reading myself, which is how I learned more about what PhD was. But I was inspired to go into the highest level what education to bring, because I want to be able to go back and show people that you can do it, regardless of where you come from, regardless of the hardships that you endured or the culture that you came from. If you put your mind to it, you definitely can succeed.
I love that. In full transparency, I work in corporate America, and in corporate America, as a Black woman, it's a constant movement of the carrot stick, right? You want to get ahead. It's like, okay, you need to do this. You need to get this certification. You need to get a mentor, a sponsor. Okay, now you've done that. I'm going to move the carrot stick again. And so for me, education is always important to me. I have my master's degree as well. And But it was, I want to take away the carrot stick, right? I want to say that I have the credentials, the expertise to stand behind my work without you continuously saying, move the carrot stick and you got to do the next thing. And so for me, it was really driven by being an example for others in the workplace. For my children, I have 5 amazing, beautiful kids. And, I think the further you go, it's an example for them as well. But in reality, my why was set behind me wanting to have the credentials to tie to my expertise and my experience and my knowledge, so that it would take away some of the excuses that were being made for me in corporate America as a Black woman.
Corporate world, I mostly work in higher education, so I appreciate your perspective and your insight that you can bring on the corporate side of being a Black person pursuing a PhD. I'm always curious and interested to hear more about that world, so we might circle back to that one a
Sure.
little bit later, if you don't mind. One question I did have for both of you as I was reading over your description on the flyer and when Charlotta gave your introduction, I was just wondering what moments or what achievements, what particular stories from Black history do you guys hold on to keep you motivated, besides grandparents and things like that, keep you inspired as you move forward pursuing this doctorate? Because I've been down that road. I know what some of those nights are like when you're headed towards comps and things like that. So what stories or achievements do you hold on to that inspire you and motivate you to keep going?
I love that. I'm a huge studier of Harriet Tubman, and I always say, if she can do what she did I live on that strength, on that resilience. And I often will go back to her story and what she did for us to be able to even sit and have this conversation. And I just go back to that. That's one that really stays with me often. Her power, her strength is one that I love to go back to on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Michael, I'll give you a chance to answer in just one moment. I know we have a few people in attendance. I'm going to give them an opportunity to chime in. They've put some questions in the chat box, and so I want to actually give them a chance to jump in here. So, Dr. Brame, do we have any questions ready from the chat box?
Yes, we do. Wendy Perkinson is curious about resilience relating to what resilience looks like for African Americans on a daily basis. She writes, humans are resilient, but is there something different about the resilience that people of color live daily? How does this show up in your personal lives?
Wow, that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that question. I would say when I think about resilience and where I come from and resilience in my own life, I think about knowledge, right? For me, knowledge is so important because, and my research is a direct reaction to the inadequacies that have plagued, the African American people since they arrived in this country. So knowledge is the shining key of the access that can open the door to change to the trajectory of one's life. So without this knowledge, we may find it, hard, and we may fail, to reach their full potential. So as a leader, I feel like I am responsible to myself with the tools needed to usher in a wave of African Americans who are self-aware, resilient, and proud of who they are, right? My research empowers me to be the beacon of courage for those who have not entirely found their footing in the world, but I must show them that way, and consistently I must show them how to get through these open doors through that knowledge.
What he said. I don't know that I need to add on to that. That was awesome. But I think we put on, I call it our cape, like we put it on a daily basis, right? And how we show up to people and for people and ourselves. And we have to have so many different sides of who we are, right? And I think that takes such a high level of resilience to be able to shift and to pull on those different pieces of who you are just to show up in a space, just to be present and be seen in a space. I think that we have to pull on so many different parts of us and our backgrounds and our histories in order to do that on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Just want to remind everyone of Tina's answer from a moment ago when I asked her about what moment or what person, what figure does she hold on to keep her motivated as she goes through that journey of completing that dissertation. And for me, that's actually, just like she mentioned, Harriet Tubman, that's partially my answer to the resilience question. I'm a student of history, and I look back and I know what came before me. And my answer has always been, if they can do that in those circumstances, then I can do what I need to do today, because it doesn't even come close to comparing. So I use them. I use the experience of African Americans and Black people throughout history to keep me going. You can pick almost any story from any decade over the last 400 or so years, and there's a story in there that I can draw on that keeps me motivated when I didn't want to keep going at some point in school, whether it was finishing undergrad or going and getting a master's or doing the PhD program. So just want to remind everybody of Tina's answer before we turn to Michael to hear from Michael what maybe moment, achievement, or story from African American Black history that motivates you when you're maybe not necessarily discouraged, but feeling the challenge of either work or school.
Yes, I'm motivated. I feel like it is a purpose in my life because I stand on the shoulders of such strong people. But when I think about it, I think about the slavery people who came into this world, who voices were taken, their language were taken, the culture was taken, the traditions were taken, and yet they were resilient and surviving. You know, listening to the old hymns, "We Shall Overcome," and things like that, and how they had to dig deep to inspire themselves when they were getting whipped and pushing cotton, when they had to, even when the Emancipation Proclamation came out and they said, "We are free now." But think about those slaves who had to still work for a master who has whipped them, beat them, killed some of them, and yet they still have to stay there and work for them. You know, think about, they thought about more than just themselves. So when I think about these type of stories of even Harriet Tubman, as we talked about, when Harriet talked about how I would have freed more slaves if they knew they were enslaved, right? Like when you think about the resilience of how many times, even though I knew I was going to get beat, I knew they may cut my legs off, my arms off, my tongue out, yet I was still running for my freedom. That takes a lot of resilience to still run in the midst of knowing that there may be consequences at the end, but yet I'm still going to run because I need to run to see what the end is going to be. That right there is so powerful to just hear that and think about that, which inspires me to keep on going because I got to run to see what the end going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Michael. That motivates all of us, and that right there can keep some of us going tonight, because I know we all have to get up and go to either class or work tomorrow, and we all got to keep running. So thank you for that. You may recall I opened our discussion here by asking you guys, why is Black History Month important to you? I want to turn the question a little bit and ask you, how or why should we celebrate Black history in the other 11 months of the year?
I love that question. I don't think it should just be 1 month out of the year. And we have such amazing contributions to society, yet even now, right? And how do we highlight that and talk about that? And I think it's our voices and getting allies and others who shine a light on the history, the Black history of today. We can't take away what happened in history, but there's a lot that's happening right now as we speak, and people making major contributions, Black Americans, to the world. And if we lose sight of, those things, then how do we continue to move who we are as a people forward? And so I think it should be something that, we fight for. It's scary what's happening now, that there's such fear of a person, of a race, that we want to stop having discussions around this in schools and in other settings, that because of there's fear, and fear comes from, we must be doing something right. My grandmother would say, if they stop talking about you, you're doing something wrong. But as long as they talk about you, you're doing something right. So I think we need to make sure that we don't just have these types of conversations and dialogues in February. We have them every month of the year.
And to piggyback off Tina, I think that it helps. I think if we continue to celebrate it, I think it will help shift the atmosphere and go beyond, ensuring that everyone who makes up this melting pot of what we consider America, who collectively make up these United States, that we continue to make people aware of the experiences, like of the successes of these Black people, the failures, the perseverance, the strength, and the voices of those people who have helped shape the culture of this country, right? With the educational focus, I think, the history of African Americans can be acknowledged and preserved in the domains of modern learning environments. And so we have to keep those voices alive to ensure just to allow people to be aware, to know that some of the great things that we take advantage of in this American life were created by people of African descent, of African Americans, and we need to pay homage to that.
I agree, obviously. Before we take another question from our attendees, as Tina was speaking, she actually was leading into the next question that I wanted us to discuss, and I want to hear your perspective on it. The theme for this year's panel series is, why is it important to celebrate Black history today? And I want you to focus on that word today for just a moment, to get your perspective on it, because I thought it was interesting that they could have just said, why is it important to celebrate Black history, but they actually put the word today on the end of our theme. What do you see in the world today that makes celebrating Black history particular? I mean, Tina touched on it a bit, but just want to dive a little bit deeper on this for a moment from some very learned individuals, and I want to hear your perspective. What makes today particularly important particularly pressing for us to focus on the importance of Black history?
But when we think about it, thank you for that question. When we think about it, think about us as African Americans, how I can go to school today and I can learn Spanish, I can learn French, I can learn German, I can learn all these different languages, and languages are part of culture. But then when I look at laws as far as Florida, and they're trying to take away the African American studies in school, right? So it affects me because I said I can go to school and I can learn about anybody else's culture, and I can't learn about my own. And when I think about that, that's why I was like, it's very pressing that we as African Americans continue to have our voices spoken and have our voices known, because now it's getting to a point where even politically, it's being brought into a system, another systematic segregation of taking away who we are and taking away our voices and want to learn about us. So it's funny because what I get from that is I can learn about everybody else's culture but my own. And I think it's really important that we fight against that type of hypocrisy.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And, I think about growing up, and we celebrated these Black figures of these Black people, and they were celebrated by other Black people and that looked like me in school. And I think about my children who probably only saw one Black teacher, right? And so if they can't hear about it and they can't see those that look like them, what's the example for them? How are they understanding what resilience of themselves look like, the blood that runs through them? And so I think it's really critical that today, not only do we continue to highlight those individuals who, has some big shoulders, right, that we stand upon, but we have a lot of those people that's coming along today, and it's a strong generation, but how do we keep making them even stronger? So I think that's the reason why we have to be very loud in making sure that we don't lose sight of that. You can talk to some of these children today and they have no idea who some of these people are. And they don't know that what they've paved to get to where we are today, but start tying some of what they sit in today to some of those historical figures and events that's happened in the world. I think that there's a connection that needs to be happened for a generation that's losing sight of that.
I don't want to say it's shocking, but I agree with what you're saying about that generation that's kind of losing sight of it today. You would think in this time when we have this almost unparalleled level of technological interconnection that we could keep this current generation kind of tapped into their history, but it seems like it's getting harder and harder, and they're losing more and more touch day by day. So we'll come back to the technology piece later. I want to give our attendees an opportunity to jump in before we take a more global look at Black history. Maria, were there any more questions from our attendees?
Yes, I've got one from Nina Shelby, who, by the way, is an HBCU alum. So congrats to her, right? She writes, Black history is so important and it extends far beyond slavery, but often the conversation can get stuck there. How can we highlight and bring to the forefront all of the many other positive aspects of our Black history, which relates to some of the things that you were just talking about? So yeah.
Tina, you have any thoughts?
Other than some of the thoughts that I've shared, I agree with that's a great question. I agree with what Nina is saying, and we do need to go beyond to be able to propel forward, right? Michael and I have some amazing conversations, but we recently had a conversation about critical race theory and how that can get us stuck in a place, right? But how do we think about creating a different space where we can move forward as a people and not get stuck there? So I think it's a very relevant conversation. And I think that also goes back to how do we begin to connect this generation to the things that's important to them, to some of those aspects of what's happened in the past, right? So that they don't lose that piece. But I think that's a large part of some of the conversation that Michael and I were having around critical race theory as well.
Absolutely. Such a great point, Tina. And also, we have to understand that once we reach a certain level in status or position or whatever that may look like, we have to always remember that we do have to reach back to those to bring them forward. I know a lot of times we have to understand that community is really big. I really appreciate Nina, who answered the question, who invited me to different functions to even connect to other different African Americans in Los Angeles, because I was here and didn't know anyone, but having the courage to step out and become a part of these social organizations that are doing great things in our community and actually being at the forefront of, we always want to know who's going to do it, who do we send? And instead of start raising our hands to say, I'll go, right? And I'll be the example, or I'll go and try to get more information, more knowledge, more funds and finances to help propel forward the people that are behind me who necessarily can't do it. And so we have to remember to always build the community and not just once we reach a certain status, leave that community, because we are stronger together.
You raised an interesting point in your answer, Michael, and I want to stay on it for just this moment here. You talked about how big the community is and we don't always realize it. Both of you, but I'll start with Michael first. You both getting PhDs in global leadership. I want to focus on that global piece for just a moment, because it's Black History Month. It's not African American History Month. I want to hear your thoughts or your insights on the aspect of Black in a global sense when we get to February, or if I had things my way, every month of the year. How do we make connections globally to that larger Black community and their achievements, their contributions to the advancement of mankind?
That's such a great question, because I often had to navigate that myself, because I didn't have any leadership that showed me how to navigate this big world that we live in. Keep in mind, I came from Mississippi with only 3,000 people where I live. So how do I navigate that, right? I was thinking about first exposure. we have to be able to have that type of exposure. And working with, currently right now, we're working with Creed, which is a high school that we're working with in our classes. And one of the things that they do is they take an international trip. They take their students on an international trip just to give them that exposure of what international life is like. I didn't have that abilities to go and see or know how to function, even in a international perspective. Like I didn't know, how to keep myself or how to act when I go to certain cultures. Certain cultures believe in certain things. Well, because I didn't have that exposure, I didn't know how to do that. But I think it's very important that we expose, even from a young age, young African-American boys and girls, so that when they get older, they would have that understanding and they would know how to connect themselves with those African-Americans that are even overseas. Currently, I have learned to do networking. Networking is very important. And now at Pepperdine, I've networked with some professors who have gotten me into contact with a lot of international leaders around the world. So I think that we have to keep that connection going, and we have to keep that exposure even from a young age.
Yeah, I so agree with Michael on that one. It is a great question. And I think about a lot of colleges, universities today are incorporating international studies, global studies as part of their programs and business, but not a lot of students are opted into it that look like us, because they don't have that level of exposure, right? They don't really know what that means for them. And to Michael's point, I think you have to be very purposeful. So I love the work that Creed is doing and exposing students to, there's a broader world out there, and you go places, you go to Asia and you see Black people, right? That might look a little different than you. And, I grew up in New York. I'm from New York. I now live in the South in Virginia, but my children, I have to be very purposeful, my husband and I, and my husband, I see he's on this call. That's the benefit of putting things out there and they getting access to things, right? And, but, we were very purposeful in ensuring that we exposed our kids to various communities, because that's how we grew up. And so we saw Jamaican Americans and Haitians and all different types of Black people that spoke different languages. That's just a melting pot of who we became. Our children, however, we had to be very purposeful in that and taking them to different places and exposing them. And they didn't, because they also didn't see that in school. So, I think it's just a purposeful, intentional thing that you have to do, and encouraging students today to take an international class. You don't have to go international, but just learn about someone that's very different than you are, so that they can have that global mindset and global thinking.
Thank you for that, Tina and Michael, both of you. That was an excellent answer. I know you may not have been prepared for that question in advance, but it's just something I always think about with our degree, global leadership, and we sometimes forget about the global part.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to make sure our attendees are heard. So Maria, if there's 2 questions, we'll take 2 this time, and then I have a couple more questions for my fellow panelists here tonight.
So we haven't gotten any more questions in the chat. Yeah. Yeah, so please feel free, everyone, to go ahead and jot your questions down in the chat, and we'll try to get them answered.
Dr. Gross, and just while we're waiting, I know that when Tina was speaking from an international perspective, I think, I often ask, what more can we at Pepperdine do to give exposure to those college students that are coming into the programs and who haven't had that international exposure? What are we doing to give that access, right? It's easy to say, oh, go look it up, but how do we take it up one notch further to ensure that as global leader students, that we're not just sending you to a place, but we actually helping you make those connections, because ultimately those connections is what's going to help us when it comes to the networking piece.
Definitely agree. Do you have any ideas or any thoughts on how we can do that? Because I know that's one of the things that I'm actually researching in my research agenda post-dissertation. It's that whole international exposure, as you mentioned exposure, and that was the key. That's the first step that I focus on, is how do we get that exposure and how do we structure that? And so I just want to know if you had any thoughts on how we could help get exposure. Then I'll go to my prepared question.
Well, I think one of the things that is doing a great job of when we take the international trip, but I really, it's funny because I think in the master program, they allow the master students to take a trip anywhere they want, and they have to come back, and it's structured a little different, right? But I think with the way that it's structured in the master program is really great because it allows them to get so in depth in the country that they desire to go into, versus when you're taking such a large group and you have to have such a big itinerary when you go. But I think as PhD and EDD students, I think we've reached a level where I think we can take those type of ventures off by ourselves without having to necessarily be in different groups. But I think it's even having those international leaders to come to us, come to Pepperdine or video calls to Pepperdine to kind of give that inspiration of helping us or allowing us that connection to go a different step. I don't think we have that exposure sometimes where there are international, we have a lot of international like connections, but I don't sometimes see them come in the door versus us going out the door.
Yeah, and I hope that you and I have an opportunity to connect about that after we finish this conversation here tonight, because we're writing that next chapter of history right here. So hopefully you and I can follow up on that when we finish our panel tonight and we get back to work tomorrow, because we have to be resilient and keep pushing forward. Before we talk more about writing this next chapter, I do believe we have a question in the chat, and I want to make sure that the questioner had an opportunity to hear your responses before they log off.
So yeah, this is really going in a different, oops, lots of questions coming in. Okay, very cool. This is a little bit of a different direction. And two questions from Wendy. So you can, Wendy Perkinson, so you can kind of decide how you want to approach this. But the first one is, how does the power of spirituality play a role in Black history? And then secondarily, have you visited Africa and what was your experience? So I don't know if you want to blend those two together or, yeah, really interesting. I love these questions.
If you guys don't mind, I'll go first and I'll give our panelists an opportunity to think about them. I'll go first. Yes, I have been to Africa. It was actually in connection with research. It was, and while I was there, I didn't actually go to church service, but I did go by a church service that they were having. So it was just, I had a wonderful time when I was there. I met great people. I hope to go back soon. The pandemic kind of threw everything off, but so I went in 2016. That sounds about right. And I plan on going back as soon as I think I'll be able to get away from work. And spirituality has been central to the Black experience here in America. If you even if you just think about it for just a moment here, in order for somebody to endure the horrors that our people had to go through, you have to believe in something that is bigger than just the human experience in order to keep moving forward. So if you go back and over time and just look at, in the Black community, religious figures have always played a key role in leading our people through any era and any challenges and struggles that they were having. And that's because spirituality is, you have to believe in something bigger than just ourselves. And religion, spirituality has always played that role in the Black community. It's gone from slave times up through the 60s, up through even today. Oh, that's just my thoughts on it, but I'll let our panelists enlighten us.
Yeah, I've not been to Africa. I'm also looking forward to my visit there. I totally agree with what you just said. I think that you think about spiritual songs and you think about the role of the Black church in our resilience as a people, our encouragement, inspiration, the support systems that we had. You think about, I go back to your grandparents and the prayer warriors, right? And it was all about helping us get through some type of a trial and tribulation. And now I think that's evolving a little bit. We have a whole conversation around the role of spirituality in Black church and things like that. But I do believe that it's evolving to more of a praise and a worship and a celebration, right? So spirituality is more, it's changing how we're utilizing that as a force to move forward and step into a different space in this world. So, but I think that it's been a generation of some type of spirituality throughout history and even today.
I've been to Egypt, and I would love to go to several other parts of Africa, but I didn't, for me, get the opportunity to get acquainted with the culture as I would like to have, because there was a time schedule. But when it comes to spirituality, I am a believer that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So when you think about that, imagine being in bondage or going through this life as an African-American. And let me just be the first to say, I am unapologetically Black. And I live it every day and I carry it with me everywhere I go. So either you're going to deal with it or not. So when I think about that and the struggles that I've been through, allowing that faith, that knowing that there is purpose for my life and not allowing those inadequacies and deficiencies of not being able to, being looked over, being, as a Black man, being criticized just for being Black, not having that faith to not allow things like that to overcome me, not to let mediocrity and complacency be my companion, not allowing things like that to take that joy away from me, because I know that the faith that I have in the God that I serve is bigger than any type of racism, any type of bias that I can ever endure. And if I just continue to believe that and hope on that, I know that it's going to all work out for my good, because it was created for good.
Michael came to preach tonight, y'all.
I love the Lord.
Amen.
Okay, I know we're beginning to wind down on our time here. So Dr. Bramey, were there any other questions from our attendees?
We do have one more question.
I'd like to get them all in.
Yeah, it's in a little bit of a different direction from Dolly Harris. How do we help other people understand that Black people have and want the same positive outcomes for their children, a good education, great job, a family?
I have I don't want to say controversial, but I've had people disagree with me on this, but this is my standpoint on it. I'm tired of having to show up and show how everyone else what we appreciate and how the things that we want, right? It's not my job to prove to you. It's just my job to do the right things and to show you, but people see things very different sometimes. And, as long as I am making sure my children are getting educated, I'm speaking up for those who can't, that I'm doing my part and showing up in that space, then that's action, right? So I think it's through the action of how I am, how I show up, and how people experience me. But it is not my job. I've chosen not to take that weight on my shoulders, to be the one that feels like it's my job to prove to you that we want the same things and that we're looking to experience the same level of equality and inclusion that you have access to that I may not. It's just my job to create a space for those who don't have a voice.
And also piggybacking off of what Tina said is being able to just have that conversation and say, this is what I want. But a lot of times, just in agreement with Tina, we make it our job to ask questions to African Americans and expect them to always answer different questions. And the internet is so big nowadays that some questions that you don't necessarily deserve an answer to, you can go and research that yourself. And then how do you, after you've researched and after you've understood it, how do you stand in the gap to answer those questions that are asked to us as an ally or as a friend? Dr. Martin Luther King made a statement, and he says, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So when we think about the silence of our friends, I don't always have to be in the room to discuss what are the things that are missing out in our culture or in our communities. We're not always in the room. So those that are in the room as allies, it's up to them to also speak up and talk about helping people to understand what those positive outcomes that we want.
Thank you, Michael. And Tina, I actually did not find your answer controversial. So
Good, thank
it
you.
was very heartfelt, and I appreciate your candor and your honesty. I would just say, I don't know if the question was posed to me as well, I would just say, it's not so much that it's not our job. Some people don't want to understand that Black people have and want the same positive outcomes for their children. I was reading Dolly's question again. So as Tina said, all I can do is be the best version of me that I can be. You can't help someone who's choosing to be blind and not see things. So just the only way I can help somebody is just to do the best that I can. If you choose not to see it, there's only so much I can do, and my plate's already full. So, the last question I did want to pose to you guys is, was there any questions that Michael or Tina that you guys wanted to pose or that you have?
No, I didn't have any questions. Thank you.
I did not either. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I want to thank both of you for participating in this student panel for the Black History Month speaker series. Dr. Brame, did you have anything else or lead us on how we close out this evening?
Yeah, there are no more questions. Although Wendy Perkinson very enthusiastically said, preach. I think probably for all of you, but so yeah, thank you so much to all our attendees for your great questions and attentiveness. So I don't have anything else. I'm just ready to close out. If you all have any more comments that you wanted to make, our panel, Dr. Gross, any final words?
I would like to thank Dr. Gross, and it's been an honor to sit on the panel with Michael and the two of you. So I really appreciate all of you and my colleagues who showed up and my amazing husband who is my manager. So I really thank you for being here tonight. But what I would like to leave you all with, don't let this just be a moment. Create a space and a time and have these conversations beyond February. And that's our challenge for all of ourselves.
Thank you so much. I think that's so true. And we really appreciate everybody who attended and our wonderful PhD students, Tina Ragland and Michael Fountain. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughts, your insights and experiences. So valuable. And Dr. Gross, thank you so much for the questions that you prepared and the way that you presented them and elicited wonderful thoughts and really have a lot to consider and think about. So what a beautiful conversation we all got to have tonight. So, and I want to encourage everybody to keep an eye out for our upcoming Black History Month presentations. So glad that you were able to come here tonight. The session is being recorded. So if you want to revisit, it'll be available in the near days. So thanks so much to everybody and have a beautiful rest of the evening.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.